Sometimes, crimes begin in silence. And sometimes, silence itself is the crime. It was the winter of 2005. Manchester, England. Cold rain swept through the narrow streets, tapping against the windows of Ridgeway High School. The last bell had long faded away. The classrooms were dark, the corridors empty. Except for one. Inside the school's science lab, a single lamp still glowed. A 17-year-old student named Liam Turner sat alone at a workbench, surrounded by wires, code, and circuits. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was quiet, focused, brilliant. Machines listened to him more than people did. He was working on a robotics project, the kind of thing that could win scholarships. It was supposed to be a normal night. A few hours of coding, maybe a late bus ride home. But that night would change everything. The security camera outside the lab shows Liam entering at 8:37 p.m. Laptop in one hand, a notebook in the other. He looks tired but calm. That was the last time anyone saw him before the chaos began. The next morning, the school janitor opened the lab and froze. On the floor lay the body of Mark Davies, the school's biology teacher, a respected man known for his discipline, sometimes too strict, sometimes too proud. He had been struck in the head with a heavy metal object. No one saw it happen, no one heard a thing. The only fingerprints on the scene, Liam's. The only person caught on camera that night, Liam. For the police, it was enough. A perfect suspect. A smart kid with access, with motive. Maybe a grudge over a bad grade. Detective Hall, the lead investigator, reportedly said, "It's clean. The boy did it. We just have to make it official." When the officers arrived at the Turner home that evening, Liam's mother was in the kitchen, making tea. She looked up, confused, smiling at first, until she saw the two uniformed men behind her son. "Ma'am, your son is under arrest for the murder of Mark Davies." The teacup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the small house. Liam stood still, pale, silent, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do it." But they didn't listen. They read him his rights, placed the cuffs around his wrists, and led him out into the rain. From the doorway, his mother called out, trembling, "Liam, tell them you didn't." He turned his head, tears mixing with the cold rain on his cheeks. "I didn't, Mum, I swear." The next morning, every newspaper in Manchester had his picture on the front page. Teen genius kills teacher. Ridgeway High horror. The boy who snapped. They showed the same photograph, Liam at a science fair, smiling, holding his invention, but now under a headline that made him a monster. At the police station, he sat in a gray room for hours. The walls were blank. The air was heavy. He answered the same questions again and again. What time did you leave school? Did you argue with Mr. Davies? Did he threaten you? He tried to explain he was there to finish his project, not to hurt anyone, but every word he spoke sounded weaker, less believable. Silence became his only defense. The detectives took his fingerprints, his shoes, even the hoodie he was wearing. And there, in the evidence photo, a small metal stain on the cuff of his sleeve. To them, it was blood. To Liam, it was oil from a machine he'd been fixing. But who would believe a 17-year-old kid when all the evidence screamed, guilty? That night, in the holding cell, Liam sat on the metal bench, staring at his hands. He could still smell the faint scent of chemicals from the lab. He replayed every minute of that night again and again, looking for something, anything that could prove he wasn't the killer. Outside, the rain still fell, and somewhere in the city, a mother prayed that someone, anyone, would see what she saw in her son. A boy, not a murderer. A week later, the trial of Liam Turner began. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and headlines screamed for blood. They called it the school lab murder. Inside, Liam sat at the defense table, pale, silent, eyes lowered. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like what he was, a scared 17-year-old boy in a borrowed suit. Across the aisle, the prosecution team looked confident. They had the security footage, the fingerprints, and the so-called murder weapon, a piece of metal equipment from the robotics lab. And they had a story. The prosecutor, a man named Richard Cole, stood before the jury and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not an accident. This was anger. This was revenge." The victim, Mr. Davies, had given the defendant a failing grade, and in a fit of rage, Liam Turner struck him down. His words cut through the silence of the courtroom. People in the gallery whispered. Some shook their heads. Liam stared at the table. He could feel every pair of eyes on him. He wanted to shout, "It's not true!" but his voice wouldn't come. Then the defense stood. A young woman in her early 30s, calm, composed, Emily Carter. She wasn't famous, but she was sharp. She'd taken the case because she believed in second chances, and something about Liam's eyes told her this boy wasn't lying. She faced the jury and spoke softly. "You've heard the story the prosecution wants you to believe. But stories can lie. Evidence can be twisted. Tonight, we'll show you that Liam Turner could not have committed this crime." As the days passed, the courtroom became a battlefield. Every moment of Liam's life was torn apart and examined. His friends testified, some in fear, some in doubt. One teacher said he had seen Liam arguing with Mr. Davies a week earlier about a missed deadline. It wasn't much, but to the prosecution, it was motive. The security footage was played again and again. Grainy black and white images on the big screen. Liam entering the lab at 8:37 p.m. No footage of him leaving. The prosecutor paused the video, pointing at the screen. There. That's him, the last person to see Mark Davies alive. Emily watched quietly. Something about that timestamp bothered her. She wrote it down on her notepad. 8:37 p.m. Then she circled it twice. That night, after court, she stayed up late reviewing every piece of evidence. Video footage, police reports, witness statements. When she compared the footage to the school's maintenance logs, she noticed something strange. A note in the janitor's report that week. The security system had lost power for 20 minutes earlier that month. When the power came back, the internal clocks reset 17 minutes slow. If that clock was still wrong, then the camera showing Liam entering the lab at 8:37 actually recorded him at 8:20, 20 minutes before the time the coroner said the victim was killed. Emily's heart began to race. If she could prove that, Liam was innocent. The next day in court, Emily stood confidently for the first time. "Your Honor, new evidence suggests that the security camera system's internal time was inaccurate." The prosecutor frowned. "Objection, speculation." Emily lifted a document. "Not speculation. Maintenance logs, signed by the school's IT technician. The cameras were 17 minutes slow." The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward. "So you're saying, Miss Carter, that the footage used by the prosecution is mistimed?" "Yes, Your Honor. which means when Liam entered the lab, the victim was still alive, and when the crime occurred, he was already gone. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Liam looked up for the first time in days. His mother began to cry quietly in the back row. The judge called for a recess. Reporters rushed out to phone their editors. The case that had seemed so clear suddenly wasn't. That evening, Emily met Liam in the holding room. He looked exhausted but hopeful. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "does this mean they'll let me go?" She smiled gently. "Not yet, but it means the truth is finally listening." Outside, the storm over Manchester still hadn't passed, but for the first time, there was light breaking through the clouds. When the court reconvened, everything felt different. The atmosphere had changed. The confident smirks of the prosecution were gone, replaced by quiet, uneasy glances. Because now, there was doubt. And doubt in a courtroom can be as powerful as proof. Emily Carter stood tall at the defense table, papers neatly stacked, eyes sharp. She knew that the clock error wasn't just a small technical glitch. It was the thread that could unravel the entire case. When the judge returned, she began carefully. "Your Honor, the security footage timestamp does not align with the electrical logs from Ridgeway High. The cameras were 17 minutes slow. That means the defendant, Liam Turner, could not have been in the lab when the murder occurred." The prosecutor tried to push back. He suggested the timing error was minor. He said 17 minutes didn't matter. The boy could have returned later, he argued. But Emily wasn't done. She held up another sheet of paper, the lab's electricity usage report. According to this, she said, the power in the science lab was shut off at exactly 8:42 p.m. The breaker tripped because the lights and equipment were turned off manually. Yet Liam's phone data shows he connected to his home Wi-Fi at 8:40. The courtroom went still. Every eye turned toward Liam. He just sat there, wide-eyed, barely breathing. Emily continued, voice steady. "This proves one thing, Your Honor. My client was already home while someone else was turning off the lights in that lab after committing murder." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled notes like mad. The prosecutor's face turned pale. And for the first time, Liam's mother smiled through her tears. The judge leaned back. "This changes things. The court will review these findings immediately." He ordered a new round of forensic testing, fingerprints, DNA, the whole file reopened. And when the results came back a week later, they revealed something the police had missed. Among the fingerprints on the murder weapon, there was one partial print that didn't belong to Liam or the victim. It belonged to Alan Brooks, the school's janitor. At first, no one believed it. Brooks had worked at Ridgeway Fry for 15 years. Quiet man, kept to himself. But when detectives visited his home to question him, they found something in his garage. A watch. A men's wristwatch with MD engraved on the back. The initials of Mark Davies. The same watch the victim had been wearing the night he died. When confronted, Brooks broke. His hands shook, his voice cracked. He said he hadn't meant to kill anyone. We argued over money. He owed me. I just pushed him. He fell. I panicked. The truth hit the courtroom like a storm. For weeks, the world had painted Liam Turner as a monster, a genius gone wrong. But in reality, he'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the evidence had followed the easiest story. When Alan Brooks confessed, he was arrested on the spot. The media that once called Liam a killer now called him the boy who survived the system. But survival came at a price. He had lost a year of his life, his reputation, his peace. After the hearing, Liam met Emily outside the courthouse. Rain was still falling, the same kind as that first night. He looked up at her and said softly, "If you hadn't believed me, no one would have." Emily smiled gently. "That's what the truth needs sometimes, Liam. Just one person who refuses to stop looking." The next day, the front page read, "Liam Turner cleared of all charges. Real killer confesses." But beyond the headlines, something deeper lingered. A reminder that truth, no matter how buried, always finds its way out. The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is waiting to breathe. After 12 long months of trials, hearings, and sleepless nights, the judge read the verdict. Liam Turner, not guilty. For a second, no one moved. Then a soft gasp escaped from the back of the room. Liam's mother. Her hands covered her mouth. Her son, finally free. Reporters whispered, pens clicking, cameras flashing. Liam didn't react. He just closed his eyes. He had dreamed of this moment so many times, but now that it was real, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. He stood up slowly, his wrists trembling. Emily Carter, his lawyer, smiled beside him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's over, Liam." He nodded, but deep down, he knew it wasn't really over. Outside the courthouse, the world was waiting. Journalists surrounded him, microphones in his face. "Liam, how does it feel to be free? Do you forgive the police? What will you do next?" He didn't answer. He just looked up at the gray Manchester sky and took his first breath as a free man. Over the next few weeks, the story exploded across the country. Headlines changed tone overnight. Teen genius wrongly accused. Justice finally served. But for Liam, justice didn't erase the memories. The cold of the holding cell, the way people looked at him, the way his mother cried every night. Freedom, he realized, doesn't feel like it used to. It's quieter, heavier. One afternoon, he returned to Ridgeway High. The lab was still there. Same tables, same smell of metal and dust. Only this time, the room felt smaller, like it belonged to a different life. He walked to the desk where it all began. The stains on the floor were gone, but the memories, they never really leave. Emily joined him there. They stood in silence for a while. Then she said, "You know, Liam, what you went through, it's going to define you, but it doesn't have to destroy you." He nodded, eyes fixed on the window. Rain was starting again, soft and slow. "I just don't want anyone else to go through this." That promise stayed with him. Years later, Liam Turner would go on to study law. Not robotics, not engineering, law. He became a defense attorney, the kind who fought for people without a voice, people like him, people who were told they were guilty before anyone ever listened. At his first public talk, years later, a journalist asked him, "After everything that happened, do you still believe in justice?" Liam smiled quietly. "Justice," he said, "isn't perfect. It's slow, it hurts, but when it finally comes, it gives life back to the truth." He paused, then added softly, "I lost a year of my life, but I found my purpose." The audience rose in applause. But to Liam, it wasn't a praise. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one spark of belief can change everything. And somewhere in that quiet moment, the rain outside Manchester turned into sunlight. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it demands everything you have. But the truth always waits to be found.